Good afternoon, everybody. Is this working? Oh, fantastic. Great. I can wander. Now for something completely different, as Monty Python used to say. I'm not going to talk about pressures, temperatures, pipe sizing, or any of that stuff, although I do know about it. But I'm going to talk about a new government scheme to bring in regulation around technical issues, standards, and all of this is very much addressing every aspect of what you've been talking about to date throughout the afternoon. I am an independent consultant. I've been 40 odd years in the business, but for the last 2 years, I've been working for DESNZ, the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. And so I'm wearing a DESNZ hat. However, nothing I am going to say is government policy. No dates shall be adhered to, right? I'm just trying to give you a direction of travel, and it's all work in progress. So we're in the middle of developing this HNTAS project, or HNTAS as some people like to call it. So I'm going to try and give you a flavour of this. It is huge. I could go on all afternoon, all night, and into the next day, even on the work in progress that we've got so far, but I will relieve you of that and try and go as quickly as possible. Around 2020, there were consultations out to the market, and one of the takeaways from that was that there was strong support for regulation to come in to make some of this stuff happen, the stick, if you will, rather than it all being voluntary. The changes that are now coming through HNTAS are regulation. Now, I said ignore all the dates. It's 25 to early 26 probably, and it may phase in. Certification of heat networks, of all heat networks, including all the new build heat networks, the 50,000 HIUs going in every year, but all new networks, and all the 14,000 existing heat networks. That includes both communal and district level heat networks. It's pretty full coverage. It's England and Wales, and our Scottish partners are working with us to introduce it in Scotland as well. This HNTAS, this technical assurance scheme, is about setting minimum technical requirements around the sort of things you've been talking about. Minimum pressure requirements, minimum temperature requirements, minimum VWAT, or sorry, maximum VWAT. And actually, all of that detail quite a lot of that detail we've already worked through. We've still got some way to go with that, but it is very detailed. But this assurance scheme is not just about the technicals. It's about who checks it, who assesses it, when, why, what for, how much, etc., 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 the procedural aspects of this assurance scheme. Alongside this, other measures are coming in as part of this regulatory framework. It's huge. The changes are huge. And all of that is going to sit under Ofgem as the heat network regulator. HNTAS is one part. Zoning is a whole nother piece that I could talk about, but I'm not going to. And consumer protection is really at the heart of what Ofgem are trying to do. It's very important to remember that when we're talking about pressures, temperatures, efficiency, VWATs, that actually it's really about, is the consumer getting a satisfactory level of heat that is reliable at the right temperature and so on. It's about consumers, not about us techies, is my view. This is the flipping obvious that you've been talking about all afternoon. Why should we regulate? Well, we do, unfortunately. People don't do things on a very voluntary basis. They do need a bit of a kick and a stick. But I just want to go back to this. It's about consumer outcomes. That is our fundamental objective. That if we are not actually making the plane fly properly and reliably, we ain't doing our job as ground engineers, as it were. That's the sort of principle. And of course, reducing carbon is inevitable. And you guys have been talking about uncontrolled bypasses and inefficiencies, poor water quality. All of these issues we are very much directly targeting in HNTAS. And we're trying to actually cover all the bases of the technical issues and make people at least get to a minimum standard. We're not trying to get them to the best, but actually, if we can get all the heat networks onto a minimum standard, then great. And that minimum standard is more or less based on CP1. So I was lead author on CP1 and worked with quite a number of you in the audience, including Richard in particular, on CP1. If you are following CP1, then you'll probably be okay and you'll slot straight into HNTAS and you'll follow the procedures and you'll go, yeah, well, I was sort of doing that anyway. But 98% of the heat network operators out there and designers will actually say, oh, crumbs, I wasn't doing that little bit. I better sort that out. And so that is the objective, is to actually bring up the base and get rid of the worst heat networks. And then later on, we can raise those standards at some later date. Afterwards, if you don't mind. Because I've got quite a lot to go through, and he gave me 15, and I've asked for 20, and I could well be 25, and we're over anyway. Look, so I'll pick it up afterwards if that's all right. So these are the aims of HNTAS, the HNTAS. Low carbon, reliable, affordable heat, etc., but they are based upon a bedrock, a foundation of key principles. And these key principles are very important. So I'll just expand on a couple of those just now, because they actually show you why we're shaping HNTAS as we are. Firstly, we want it to be preventative. So I'm fed up of seeing pipes go in the ground and then people go, oh, God, we should have insulated them more, you know. But nobody is going to dig them back up for 40 years. And so actually getting the design right and getting the construction right and getting the commissioning right before we make a mess of it and actually get to a point where heat is on. And that preventative piece says we need to attack the front end before heat goes on, as well as when heat is on. The other one I wanted to pick out of this is that actually we're basing this around KPIs that were mentioned earlier. And we've got maybe 20, 25 KPIs that run right throughout HNTAS in all sorts of ways and shapes. But actually, we are about measuring those KPIs in practice on every heat network and proving performance. We are not about sort of finger in the wind anymore. This is really going to be quite tough for some people, I think, but it is about real outcomes on real heat networks. So Energy Act of 2023 put in place Ofgem as the heat network regulator. Fundamentally, we're taking heat networks and turning them into a new utility like gas and electricity. And we're trying to do that, given where we started with CP1, sort of 2010, I think over a 20-year period. And we won't finish this till 2030 at the very least. So, you know, we've got to think big here and long term. But I think we're right in the middle of that 20-year period at the moment. The code manager HNTAS will be a code manager. It will be an entity. It will have and hold and love a set of technical specifications, this pressure, this temperature, but it will also hold a series of assurance procedures. You do this, then you check that, then you've got to be trained, then, etc. And in particular, assessor requirements. So the assessors need to be trained and pass that training and then go on to a register, and only those people can assess, have you passed that bit of HNTAS? Yeah? So there's a strong element of rigor in what we're trying to introduce. scheme characteristics here. HNTAS started to look at, well, how do you define a heat network and all of that sort of stuff. And you go down a very long tube and you never come out when you try and define that sort of stuff. So we've got a pick and mix approach here, which is we've broken heat networks into these elements, right? They all have some or all of these elements. A district scheme might have energy centre district distribution in the ground in the road, communal distribution up the building, a substation maybe, consumer connection like an HIU or something. But a communal system, which is a heat network, would only have an energy centre, communal distribution, and consumer connection. So you only need to assess and test, are those three elements actually doing the job? Right? And so we've got this pick and mix approach where actually you define what the problem is, what the heat network is in the first place, and that defines what you need to assess. And you can see it again here. Here's your elements, as we've called them. Yeah? And here are stages, sort of like stages in CP1. And if I take, let's say, phase 4, this would be, phase 3, this would be design, yeah? And so there would be an assessment of the energy centre in this box here, energy centre, actually at phase 3 and at phase 2 and so on. And so there are a whole set of gateways and assessments to get through to actually prove ultimately your end energy centre is actually working. If you have an energy centre, they all do, but they don't all have substations, for example. And some assessors may specialise in one of those boxes. Some assessors may get trained up to do all of those boxes. So there's some flexibility there. In developing this, we have not ignored the sector, whatever anybody says. We have actually run a lot of workshops with sector specialists and experts. And we still continue to run those sorts of sub-working groups to develop this approach. And we will be pushing out a big consultation on HNTAS either late this year or early next year, possibly around 100 pages. So, I mean, that's how much there is in HNTAS. We are currently, having got to a certain point, we said, right, we need to test this stuff in reality. And so we're currently piloting all of these, or not all, but certainly the new heat network normative documents, requirements, actually testing those in about, up to about 8 or 10, I guess, pilot instances at different boxes in that matrix I showed you, to see whether what we are proposing is achievable, doable, testable, accessible. You know, does it work in practice? Will it work in practice? And so we're not actually saying this great ivory tower that we built is just what you've got to do. We're actually testing it with real heat network operators and real assessors. We have appointed 4 assessor organisations under a competitive tender. They are currently starting off doing quite a number of these pilots. And we'll be doing existing heat network pilots later, early next year. So we are very keen on these words validation and verification. And this validation piece applies to design, and the verification is what are the outcomes at the end? What is the real performance? It's wrapped around these elements, and it is to ensure real performance in practice, meaning real data, meaning real metering that you guys have been talking about. And ultimately, getting heat networks certified. That's where we're going. That's the level of rigor we want a certificate at the end of this to actually say this meets all these minimum standards. And 2 years later, another certificate to actually say, and it's proved that is the case in performance. Yeah, assessment levels. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Where did I get to? Assessment. Apologies, sorry. So, at the end of construction and commissioning, Ofgem simply want a 0 or a 1 signal. Did it pass HNTAS or did it not? Not interested in anything else. That's HNTAS's problem, right? So our job, HNTAS, is to give that 0 or 1 signal. We've got to demonstrate that it meets all these KPIs, which include water quality, VWAT, pressures, temperatures, etc., etc., etc. And we can then issue a certificate at that point and give a 0 or 1 signal for authorization for heat to be supplied by that heat network. Current market practices may lead to a proportion of people not being able to meet that. So again, I go back to this idea of preventative, that is why we're doing assessments during design, construct, commissioning, to sort of say, look, if you design it like this, it ain't going to meet HNTAS. If you construct it like this, it's not going to get the 0 or 1 certificate. So it's preventing that sort of mess at the end, if you like. And so we need to put structures in place, formal governance structures, formal assessment procedures and so on in place to ensure that all of this works in practice and can be used in a sensible way by the sector, that we're not loading something onto the sector that they can't do. And this consultation coming out late this year, early next year, that is your opportunity. So that won't work. But don't tell us that. Tell us that won't work because, and here's a better solution, right? So our ears are open to work with the sector in that sort of way. This is one of the key slides that I wanted to try and get to fairly quickly, and that is, I've painted the picture a little bit, but here's the slightly more detail. The clipboards are where assessments will take place, yeah? These dotted lines are gateways. If you don't pass, well, let's take this one. If you don't pass all these 3, and you get statements of conformity issued at each of these, if you don't pass, you don't get to build turn the heat on, and you don't get a certificate at this point because you haven't got through the gateway, because you haven't actually met HNTAS in, say, this assessment. So it's a progressive set of assessments through the design process, which could be like 3 or 4 or 5 years even in some instances, to make sure that people pass here, as many as we can, and get that certificate. And then we actually go on for another 2 years in operation, get real data and prove that they actually meet the KPIs in practice, and then they get certificate too. Beyond that, there is another phase which actually says you can move into a self-reporting piece. So you don't need to do any more assessments unless you fail some of the KPIs. So you can continually feed us your data every year, but if it goes out of kilter and we can see it on a platform that we're developing, actually we will say, right, okay, you need an assessment. But other than that, that is the sort of nirvana to get to, because actually that self-reporting will be cheaper, easier, and so on, providing you stay within KPIs. This is the new build track. When I say new build, I don't mean new buildings, I mean new heat networks, yeah? We are also putting in place new positions. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not on here, but never mind. We're putting in place what we've called duty holders. So the responsible person is the owner of, and it could be the local authority or the social housing provider, and they are ultimately responsible, but they won't do the day-to-day design, contracting, whatever, and so they will designate Joe Bloggs is our designated designer, and they do and are responsible for all the design on their behalf. That's why it's designated. And same with the contracting side, same in operation, that the day-to-day operator of the heat network will be the designated party. So that could be a separate, different company. I'm not going to mention names, but you could see this is the operational subcontracting company day to day, but this is the local authority or whatever. That very much mirrors what has come out of Grenfell. Single people, what's the word? Well, responsible. Something you can actually put a finger on and say, it was your flipping fault. You put the wrong insulation on. We've come up with a whole raft of what we've called normative documents, technical specifications, and these actually are huge because they cover all of that matrix that we saw earlier. The new build ones are very large indeed, and they cover the technicals for responsible parties and assessors and certifiers, technical, but they also cover the scheme rules of who checks what, when, and all of that sort of stuff. No chance. Certificates, and so all of this is going to be coming out alongside the consultation later in the year, we hope, for new heat networks. So I'll go even faster. So you move then into an exceptions-based reporting, self-reporting, and if you fall within the KPI limits, fine. If you fall outside, then it's back to the assessment regime again. And the assessments are paid for by the heat network operator, the responsible party. So just a quick bit on existing heat networks. They will find it much harder to meet these sorts of things because they've got a system, it's working, but as we've talked about all day, not many of them are really performing very well. And so we need to give them a transition period to be able to catch up, if you like. We're hoping that after 10 more years, everybody will be at the same level, the same minimum standards. Yeah, move on. She's told me to move on. So it's your fault. Tentative timelines are broken into two. So anybody who was falling under the heat network metering and billing should have metering in place. And so the progression is you register, you actually then after year 3, you demonstrate that you've got all the right metering, and then you submit a performance improvement plan, you do the performance improvements, and then you actually go for certificate 1, and then you run for 2 years in operation and actually prove and get certificate 2. So you've got 8 years, but people who didn't fall under the heat network metering and billing actually have a bit longer. So that's fundamentally what this slide is saying. But performance improvement, but before and alongside performance improvement, metering. And the basic metering is at block level and energy centre level. But down here, we require dwelling level metering. We are developing a platform. And that platform will be for the assessors, the certifiers, Ofgem, HNTAS, to manage this whole piece. It's going to take a lot of doing. That's enough. So 2 more slides. I'm allowed that, aren't I? Yeah, I got the thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you so much. We currently have a scheme operator that's helping us do this, and that's GemServe, supported by Fairheat. They were put in place on a competitive tender, but we call them the shadow service provider, scheme operator, because we haven't gone live yet, so we're shadow. We're in the shadows, you see. So we have drafted the normative docs for new build heat networks. Work is underway on the existing normative documents for existing heat networks, which also include heat networks that are sort of in progress. I mean, what if they're a year from go live? You know, they haven't gone through design of HNTAS. And also including what do we do about end of life schemes. We've got 14 pilots underway through to about April. 7 are physically underway right now, being assessed. We've also done some pilot training some assessor training for the pilots, for the heat network operators involved. So we have a lot of training material developed as well. DESNZ have been producing and giving grants for a lot of training. There are probably 10 or 12 training providers out there now, supported through the Heat Network Training Grant. That's wide-ranging training, but we're also putting in place formal training courses for assessors, for all the duty holders, assessors, responsible parties, etc. They've got to pass that, then they're going to register, then they can actually do assessments. And that is underway, probably courses starting, I told you don't listen to any dates, but April next year. And work is also underway, interestingly, to turn my baby into a sort of something else. Maybe it's becoming a young chap. And that is CP1. So CP1 is being updated, but it might not, it will use some of the material in CP1, but it might look a bit different. It might even be a DESNZ type publication to support as a standard to support HNTAS. So that work is already underway as well. Next steps, well, as I said, we're drafting the normative documents for existing. We're doing this consultation, which has been a huge piece of work, and secondary legislation, the what do they call it? SIs, they're being drafted as well. We're doing piloting, we're developing this platform, coming through with this new technical standard, and we hope to implement and go live HNTAS end of 25, early 26. Fingers crossed, but I didn't tell you any of those dates. And we do have a rudimentary website for HNTAS, which we are trying to populate a bit more and more. But there's a couple of papers on there that I wrote for CIBSE Technical Symposia last year and the year before, and the links are on there, and they give you more detail around what I've been rattling about. But look, don't see this as, how can I put it, a threat, an oppressive sort of stick. This is an opportunity. There's lots of work here, in particular for the likes of everybody who's been talking today, to upgrade, improve, design, construct, commissioning, and retrofit. And so I would encourage you to get involved, wrap your head around HNTAS. It is coming down the track with great speed. Thank you very much. Was that 30 minutes?
Yes, maybe one.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll take a couple of questions if we've got time. Yeah, yes, sir.
I'll ask you after.
Okay.
Are you sure? Go ahead. Yes.
So, to do with, the feasibility and design and the process coming in to assess it at each of those gate fees. Is there somebody who quality assures the assessors work?
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good question. So I haven't dropped down into the detail around this, but we actually, the question was, what is the quality assurance around assessment? So the way we structured it is an assessor will execute the assessment. Yeah, they'll do the assessment, then they'll have to pass it to somebody else who is impartial, and that impartial person will take the decision, yes, you have passed HNTAS. So there'll be two parties involved. They could be in the same company as long as they're under different management structures at the moment. That's how we're putting it at the moment. I'd like to hear from the sector. But actually, it could be that they are two separate organisations even. But we are very conscious that there needs to be this execute, do the assessment, and then, does it make sense? And you know, somebody of seniority looking that over. Use your mic, maybe. Oh, it's gone. Go on. Try again.
Yeah, so the other question that I have is, it's a bit weird.
You've forgotten
yeah,
now, haven't you?
No, I haven't. So you said that a person is responsible, but shouldn't it be the company that should be responsible
It is.
so that
Yeah.
it filters through?
No, I'm completely right. Absolutely. It shouldn't say responsible person. We've dropped on the words responsible party. It's the company that Ofgem would take to court, sue, if we got to that, and not necessarily the individual, but the individual will get it in the neck. So it's responsible party is the correct term. What was I going to say? But we've been developing a series of appeals about decisions. You got my assessment wrong. Oh no, I didn't. Blah de blah. We're putting in place all of those structures, and part of that is why this is a personal view. Mediation. It's a bit like I don't know, getting divorced, and you actually sit in front of a mediator, and they help you work it all out. And actually, that mediation process should prevent most cases going to court and Ofgem beating people up and maybe even finding them.
Can I add something to that?
Yep.
Because it is like, that's what we are operating on. It's the Building Safety Act. They have a duty of care.
Yeah.
All people here in the room have a duty of care.
Yeah.
So that's where collaboration, feedback, and communication comes in. So it's not just the assessors, it's all these parties talking to each other and lifting each other to do best practice. So it's not just the assessors that are like,
It's the
it's the whole network.
It's the duty holders. Yeah. They have a duty of care. They have a responsibility, and that's why we've structured it just like what's come out of Grenfell. We've called it different names, designated designer, but actually that structure is quite important. And there would be a golden thread, that's another thing talked about from Grenfell, a golden thread of information coming out of Design, Construct, Commission and Operation that you would hold and collect year on year. And actually, the responsible party would be responsible for submitting that to try and continue to be HNTAS certified.